Okay, welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're going straight into unpacking a single source. It's an article titled Trump's Travel Bans, a National Security Measure.
Right. And our mission here is really just to explore the details and, importantly, the stated reasons behind the travel restrictions as, they're laid out in the specific article.
Exactly. This source, it focuses on a proclamation by President Donald Trump about visitor entry into the U.S. So we'll look at which countries were affected,
Mm,
the official justifications the source gives from back then, and also the context it mentioned, including what the source says happened later on.
okay. So the source material starts off by detailing President Trump's action. It describes it as a ban on visitors from, well, quite a few countries.
Yeah.
Specifically, it says visitors from 12 countries were completely barred, and then travelers from another 7 faced partial restrictions.
12 fully barred. That's significant. Which countries does the source actually name for that full ban?
According to this article, the ones listed with complete entry restrictions were Afghanistan, Chad, Congo, Equatorial Guinea, Eritrea, Haiti, Iran, Libya, Myanmar, Somalia, Sudan, and Yemen.
Okay. And then there were the partial restrictions, too. Which countries fell into that category based on the source?
The source lists those as Burundi, Cuba, Laos, Sierra Leone, Togo, Turkmenistan, and Venezuela. Those were the ones subject to partial restrictions, according to the proclamation described here.
So the source gives us the who and the what. Then it seems to pivot pretty quickly to the why, right? Presenting the administration's justifications at the time.
Exactly. It actually includes a direct quote from the White House Deputy Press Secretary Abigail Jackson.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it says she confirmed the report and basically framed the action as President Trump fulfilling a promise, protecting Americans from what they termed dangerous foreign actors.
And what about the specifics, the criteria for why those countries were chosen? Does the quote get into that?
It does. The source quotes her calling the restrictions country-specific, and she's cited saying they applied to places that lack proper vetting, exhibit high visa overstay rates, or fail to share identity and threat information.
Okay, vetting, overstays, info sharing.
Right. And the quote the source includes finishes strong, saying, President Trump will always act in the best of interests of the American people and their safety. The source really uses that to show the administration's stated reasoning.
That quote, yeah, as the source presents it, definitely hammers home the national security angle. The article also gives some historical context, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. It places this action within President Trump's wider efforts on border security. It specifically mentions his first term.
Right.
And that initial travel ban announcement targeting 7 majority Muslim nations.
And the source connects that earlier policy to the courts. I remember seeing that.
That's right. It's notable how the source points out that the earlier ban, well, it went through a few versions and was eventually upheld by the Supreme Court in 2018. So the source uses this to kind of show the legal background for these kinds of policies.
But then, and this is crucial, the source brings in a later development. It shows a completely different perspective emerging afterwards. What does it say happened after Trump's term?
Well, the source explicitly states that President Joe Biden, when he took office in 2021, he actually repealed the ban that this article is focusing on.
Repealed it. And the source gives his reasoning, too, right? A different view on the whole policy.
Yes, exactly. The source quotes President Biden directly. He apparently called the ban a stain on our national conscience. That's presented as his justification for the repeal.
Wow, yeah. That quote, as shown in the source, definitely stands in stark contrast to those initial justifications we talked about earlier.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's just quickly recap the main points we've pulled just from this one source. It describes specific travel restrictions on 19 countries. It details the stated reasons, focusing on vetting issues, visa overstays, information sharing problems. It also puts this in the context of earlier border security efforts, mentioning a prior policy and its legal outcome, again, as presented in the source.
And critically, it wraps up by highlighting the repeal under the next administration, offering that contrasting rationale.
Exactly. And remember, we've really focused solely on extracting the narrative and the details from this specific piece of material.
Just what's in the article itself.
So this deep dive, based purely on the account provided right here, it does raise an interesting thought, doesn't it? You have these different perspectives and actions described side by side in the source.
Right.
The initial national security justifications for the restrictions, and then later, the repeal framed around national conscience. So what does this particular account maybe reveal about the very different ways border security and foreign policy can be framed, implemented, and then, viewed later on?
That's definitely something to think about, based just on what this one source describes.
We'll leave you with that question to ponder.